Travis with another video for you guys. So today the topic is going to be ankle sprains. I've definitely had quite a few ankle sprains myself, and so I want to talk to you guys about some simple ways you can hopefully get yourself back in action. I'm going to specifically be talking about the ones on the outside, which we tend to call the lateral ankle sprains, which typically happen when your foot kind of gets forcefully turned in. And so many times, the most common way you sprain your ankle is when your foot kind of gets forced in like this, and it tends to overstretch some of the muscles here and also sprain some of the ligaments sometimes in here. And so for some of the more simple cases where obviously you don't have big ligament ruptures and things, I'll be talking about some ways you can try to rehab that, get yourself back in the game, and hopefully onto some bigger and better things. Not necessarily going to use a lot of equipment today, a couple of mini bands, maybe a yoga mat, and that's pretty much all you'll need. And as usual, I'll put all the links to the stuff I'm going to use at the bottom. So if you have a band, go ahead and grab one and we'll get started. Okay, so first thing, maybe you've hurt your ankle, you sprained it. Maybe it's a little black and blue, definitely can be a little swollen around this area sometimes. Obviously if it's just impossible to put weight on this thing and it's super swollen, you definitely could have fractured something, so you don't want to hesitate to get this thing checked out. But if we assume this is just a more straightforward, kind of lower grade ankle sprain, then you want to start to introduce some gentle movement if you can. If you want to wait a couple days after the injury, to day 3 or so, or even a little bit longer sometimes, depending on how painful it is, you certainly can. Once you're ready to start doing some movement though, you may not still want to put full weight on it yet, so starting in kind of an unweighted position. And so, even just starting with some really basic, kind of ankle pumping. And sometimes what you can do is just put your foot up on something. I'm going to use a foam roller, but this could really be anything. You can even roll up a yoga mat if you don't have a foam roll. And just starting out by just getting some what we call plantar and dorsiflexion. So all I'm doing is just going up and down. Really nothing fancy at all here. And in the beginning, again, you may not get very far. That's okay. Just do whatever you can do. Again, you're just trying to establish a starting point. Hopefully though, as you keep playing around with it, eventually you're going to start to notice. And again, this may not happen in the moment. You may need to come back to this, and after a couple of times, you're going to start to maybe notice it's moving farther. But assuming it's nothing serious, it should be getting better with time. So definitely every couple of times you do this, you should start to notice it's getting a little bit easier to go up and down, okay? And so you can, in theory, just prop your foot up on a coffee table or an ottoman and do this while you're watching television, okay? And that's just the up and down motion. The next one you want to try to get back is a little bit of what we call eversion and inversion, okay? I would probably start first with a turning out. So I'm just kind of pointing my foot this way, and you can even point it a little bit up and that way as well, okay? So depending on which one's more or less painful, you may want to start first with just turning out, and then eventually work your way over to kind of going up and out, okay? And that's what we call eversion. Okay. Now, because you probably sprained some of these ligaments, coming into inversion might be a little painful. And if you have a pretty bad sprain, it might even be loose in that direction. So you don't want to really push it very far into inversion. You're just kind of lightly seeing if you can go towards that direction. Okay. So I'd probably go a little bit more into the eversion and just kind of lightly into some inversion. Again, assuming this isn't causing, a tremendous amount of pain. Okay. And so that can be a pretty simple place to start. Again, we're just basically going up and down, side to side, okay? Once you're starting to get into that and that's starting to feel a little bit better, then you can start to make things a little more complex. Now, one of the ones that's commonly given typically in physical therapy clinics is they tell people to do the alphabet. So if you imagine your big toe is kind of your pointer, and you kind of trace through the alphabets, you kind of go A, and then you make your B, and then you make your C, The idea is really, again, you're just trying to move this thing in a lot of different ways. And so a lot of these letters are going to start to get you into more inversion as well. So again, that might be a little more provocative in the beginning. So if there's certain positions that really kill you, I wouldn't go there. Just try to see if you can lightly start to go into the directions that you were having some trouble with. So doing the alphabet, a couple times can certainly be a fine place to start. So let's just say T, you're just kind of going through the alphabet, you do your X, your Y, and then your Z. So you finished your alphabet. That can be a pretty easy place to start. Again, no real resistance in the mixture. So those are just sort of the generic starting points. What you want to do though, as soon as you're ready to, is start to introduce a little bit of load into the mixture, because generally, if you can start to tolerate a little bit of load, you'll tend to get better a little bit faster. Now that being said, if you start putting load in too early though, that can obviously set you back. So, test the waters, and I'd say tread pretty lightly when you start. But once you can start to add a band to the mixture, then things will hopefully start to get the ball rolling a little bit quicker for you. Okay, so once we start to add a little bit of load into the mixture, I'm gonna use one of these mini bands, and again, I'll put the links to the bottom. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it around my feet, okay? And I'll show this sitting down in a chair as well as laying down. You can do it both ways, quite frankly. Again, if you have something you can put underneath your feet, I would recommend doing that probably for this one if you're gonna be laying down, just because it's gonna be a little bit easier to get into it, okay? And so, as usual, you know, I can preload some tension on this by having my feet start out a little bit wider, or I can kind of ease it up by going a little bit closer together. And so as you're getting into this and testing the waters, I would say start out with maybe a lighter band, and then obviously probably not preloaded, but certainly as you get stronger, you know, you can put a higher tension band on here, and then you can start to also do this with your feet a little more spread apart. And so the basic movement I'm gonna be doing here is, again, I can start out by just doing some simple, you know, ankle pumping, where I'm just kind of holding it still. Let's just say if this is my good side, and then this side I'm going to be doing the pumping motion, okay? And quite frankly, it's probably a good idea to do a little bit of both. So you can also just stabilize with your injured side, and then try to pump with your good side. And that's also a good isometric exercise for this one. So, you know, and then you can also just kind of do some opposites if you wanted to, okay? You're sort of going back and forth. And that's probably an easier place to start, is just, you know, simple forward and back. As that's starting to get comfortable, then you can start to do a little more of that eversion, or sort of pointing your foot out, okay? And so I'm just pointing my foot sort of like over to this, you know, part of the room here. And so again, I just would try to stabilize on one side, point the bottom of my foot out, back in, out, and back in. And you can just come back to where your foot's straight. If you can, you could even let it come back a little bit farther to kind of put a little stretch here and then turn it back out again. As long as that doesn't hurt you. Again, you don't want to overstretch these ligaments again, because they might already be from the sprain. But, you know, certainly going in just a little bit shouldn't, you know, hopefully be too bad for you. Obviously, though, if that intensifies the pain a lot, then I'd stay away from that, okay? And then the next layer of the cake is you can do a little bit of a coupled motion, where I'm not only turning my foot out, but I'm also lifting up a little bit and turning my foot out sort of simultaneously, okay? And so that starts to look a little more like this. And I tried wearing socks so this is easier to visualize. I'll do this sitting down as well though, so you guys can get a better look at it. Okay, so now that I'm sitting down, I basically put the band in the same spot, just kind of around the forefoot area, which is kind of that area right underneath your toes, okay? And then from there, I could do some of those same movements. Now, the muscles are gonna be a little more disadvantaged here, so it's gonna be a little harder to do that lifting aspect, but you certainly still can do that. And then the turning out aspect is kind of like this. And so again, you can do kind of a lift with a turn out, okay? And so it's almost sort of like I'm pivoting on that heel there, okay? And what that's gonna do again is make use of these muscles on the side, which we tend to call your peroneal muscles, okay? And when you lift up, you're also getting this one in the front here called your anterior tibialis, or tibialis anterior, sometimes they call it. And so again, you're gonna start to feel those muscles kicking in as you're doing this. And all I'm doing again is just holding it still with this foot, okay? Just like the last one though, I can load it with a little more tension if I want to, okay? Just to make that a little bit harder for that ankle. And then obviously I could use a harder band as well if I really wanna up the ante on that one. So again, step one would be start out pretty close together, you know, maybe just starting to get into some, you know, kind of upward lifts here. And then eventually starting to do kind of an uplift and then a turn out, okay? And the technical names we tend to give that is dorsiflexion with eversion. Inversion is the one where your foot goes in, so we want to turn more of that foot out, okay? And again, you could just do this where you're watching a little bit of television. You know, if you want to give this a number, you know, again, we want a lot of, you know, muscle activity. We want that kind of pumping contraction to sort of bring some blood flow around this area. So, you know, again, I try to shoot for at least good, you know, 15, 20. And if you can even go somewhere between 20 and 30, I don't think that's a bad idea either. As long as just muscle working and not, you know, a lot of pain where you initially had your injury. Okay, so another really simple one you can start to get into is loading up these plantar flexor muscles a little bit by doing some heel raises, okay? And again, if you want to do both together, you certainly can, or just do one at a time. And because, you know, you don't have anything underneath your toes, your foot's just flat, this is just a really basic way to start to put a little bit more load on that area. Get that muscle kind of pumping and squeezing, and again, that muscle helps out a lot with walking. So this can just be a simple way to start getting the ball rolling on that. Another cool thing you can do, if you still have one of those mini bands laying around, is you can actually put this guy around your foot and ankles, and then just kind of bring this guy up and around your knees, sort of like what I did for a few things in my mini band video, for those of you that want to check that out. What you can do here now is just straighten that leg, okay, to kind of put some tension on that. And again, I could bring that out to the side a little more if I wanted to, and then from there, go ahead and try to lift that up and down, okay? That's gonna get a little more into that hip, but it also is gonna give your ankle a little more, you know, kind of what we call medial lateral instability to have to fight with. And so it's gonna be a nice way to just put a little bit of extra load into that calf area, okay? And then from there, you can also, this is kind of a cool, like an older bodybuilding trick, is you can push your hand down and also start to put even more load on that as you're getting stronger, okay? And by the time you could do something like this, where you're, you know, pushing down and putting some decent arm into this, maybe also having a band, or, you know, you certainly could just take that band off if you don't have one, and you could just do, you know, just the load here, or, you know, if you want to just double them up just for the sake of equality, you know, you certainly can do that. I mean, again, you could come in here and use both if you wanted to. And by the time you can do that, you know, you should be ready to start transitioning yourself into maybe a standing heel raise. Okay, so simple way to get into the standing heel raises. You're basically just going to start out flat on the floor. If you need to stabilize yourself on something, I'm just going to hang on to this foam roller. You know, if you need it in the beginning, you certainly could be on a countertop or something sturdy. It's not going to run away on you. And then all you're going to do is just lift those heels up and down as high as you can, okay? Now, in the beginning though, if you can't go up all the way without too much pain, you certainly could start out with a partial range of motion, and then with time and practice, you know, try to really get those heels up and down, okay? And so again, I would try to build up to where you can probably do at least a good 25 of these. Once you can do 25, you know, then you could even ditch, you know, your stability and maybe put that off to the side, and then now just try and do that with body weight. Starting to see if you're ready to tolerate that instability, which again is going to help work on some of that, you know, medial lateral instability in the ankle. As you're getting better at that now, you can grab something. I'm going to just take this yoga mat, I've just rolled it up, and all I'm going to do now is put a little pre-stretch on that area, and then I'm going to try and do my heel raises there, okay? And again, this is just a nice way to start getting some calf strength now. Again, because I'm on something unstable too, you know, I'm fighting a little more for that instability, and so some of those ankle stabilizers on both sides have to really kick in. So this is definitely going to help with what we call proprioception, which is sort of that feedback we get, knowing where my body is in space, and that's going to help to minimize the risk of re-injury to that ankle. And so that's a cool way to start getting into that, okay? And then the third layer of the cake would be to eventually start to do this on one leg at a time, okay? And so in the beginning, you might want to go back just down to the ground. You might want to stabilize yourself on something, okay? I'm just going to put this in my opposite hand now, or the leg that I'm assuming is my injured leg, and then I would start to do some heel raises from there. And again, I would try to work back up to, say, around 25 or so. You definitely also want to compare to your good side as well, though. So if you can do 50 on your good side, you know, then obviously you don't want to only go to 25 on your sprain side. You want to also go to 50 on your sprain side. So there shouldn't be a big discrepancy in one side from the next. So whatever your good side can get, that would at least be a starting point. Now, if your good side can barely do 10, well then I'd say also try to get your good side up to probably at least 25 as well. And so 25 on each side is kind of a good benchmark. And so again, that would just be going all the way up and all the way down, ideally with just minimal use of the hands. And then for those of you that really want to up the ante on this, you know, you certainly can go back to that preloaded, you know, pre-stretch position where your heel's up a little bit. And again, if you're going to do this, you don't have to be on something that's super high. You know, most people only have, say, about 10 to 15 degrees of what we call dorsiflexion, which is that ability to point your toe up. And so something like this should be probably more than enough. And again, if you need to come back to stabilizing yourself on this, and then go up to 25 or so here, and that would be a pretty good benchmark if you can work your way up to that, of being able to do 25 with a pre-stretched position like this. And again, the sky's the limit. You know, eventually you can certainly add more load into the mixture for those of you that might have weighted vests, or you can hold dumbbells in your hands and things of that nature. But this would just be a kind of at least to scratch the surface, get yourself comfortable with body weight, and then from there you can start up in the ante. Okay, so by the time you're doing all that, you're probably ready to start doing some things that are a little more dynamic now, a little more fun in some ways. And so put this band around your feet in a standing position, okay? And you can just do a little bit of what we call like a monster walk, okay? And in this case, I'm just gonna do it in one place, but you could continue going to the side. And this is kind of a cool one because the band is basically trying to turn my foot back into inversion, which is how I sprained it. And so by not letting it do that and moving out to the side, I sort of work my hip and knee, as well as the muscles on the side, which again are called your peroneals. And so you can go back and forth, in the beginning, just kind of moving side to side, and then eventually in time, as you're trying to get a little more dynamic into this, you could even go forward a little bit. You can go side, you could even go back, okay? And again, this is assuming that the left side is the one that's the injured one. So I'm just stabilizing on my good side, I'm just kind of working some different patterns here, okay? And so, certainly you could do both sides, and there's probably some value to doing both, but I'm just showing the side that was injured, just to kind of show you how to do this, okay? And you can again either count, or you could do this for time, and it's just a really nice way. And I'm already starting to feel those peroneal muscles kicking in here. I'm also feeling my hips. Just kind of a cool way to start to get into some more interesting exercise and definitely start to feel those muscles working. Okay, so for those of you who've seen some of my other videos, you're probably aware I'm also a pretty big fan of lunging. And I think lunging is a great way to start to strengthen that ankle complex as you're getting into some loading. And so again, the simplest way to start with a lunge is to do what I call a split squat, where you would just leave your feet planted, and then from there you're just gonna go up and down. And so that's just a nice static way to get some strength in that foot and ankle complex, obviously the whole leg. And then you would switch sides. Now that's gonna put a little more, demand on that back leg. I would still try to keep the majority of the weight on your front leg though. And then same thing, just like you're going for an elevator ride. The big mistake I see with these again is when people tend to go forward a lot as they're lunging. So just kind of sit back and think about just going straight down like you're going for an elevator ride. I tend to pitch my body forward just a little bit, and then I just lock that in, okay? And that's just because it gets a little more stretch on the glutes. But that's a great exercise to start putting some more loading onto that foot and ankle complex and just getting the whole leg strong. And it's also nice because you can always compare one side to the next. So it shouldn't be a lot stronger on your good leg or more stable than you would be on your not so good leg. As you're getting better at that, then you can start to do a little more of a dynamic lunge, where now you're actually going forward and then jumping back essentially to where you started. And if you want to alternate, that's just a nice way to compare kind of in the moment one side to the next. And it should feel pretty similar. It should feel like both sides are doing about the same thing. Shouldn't feel a lot more or less stable on one side than the other, okay? And so that would be a forward lunge. From there, you can also do what they call a reverse lunge, where you just sort of step back. And that's a nice way where you can work on a little more what we call eccentric control, or just kind of that lowering phase. And I think that's also a fantastic exercise you can work in. So a little bit of forward, a little bit of back, and then certainly you can also do a lateral or a side lunge. In this case, you might want to start holding on to something to kind of steady yourself a little bit. I like to also do this one sort of like a split squat. So I just kind of put my feet pre-positioned where they're pretty wide, and then almost like if there was a chair behind that foot. So you just kind of sit down on that foot you're moving towards, and then back, and then you would go the other way, and then back. So you just kind of sit down. So it's almost more like a squat, where you're just kind of moving away from one of your legs. And again, that's going to be a little bit more demand on that foot and ankle. That's just a nice way to really get some strengthening in multiple planes and multiple directions to again hopefully minimize that risk of injuring yourself again. Okay, so last one I'm going to throw in the mixture is a little bit of a single leg deadlift type maneuver. So you can definitely check out my deadlift video if you're not sure how to do that. Basically the idea is I'm just going to be hinging at my hips with a slight bend in my knee, and then just kind of going forward and back to standing, okay? And this is again another nice isometric way that engages my hip a little bit more. And a lot of the stability at the foot actually comes from the hip. So you definitely want to get your hip nice and strong as well, and your hip can definitely help to also stabilize your ankle. And so you always want to compare one side to the other. and just try to get comfortable and sort of master that pattern. And that should definitely give you some more stability on your feet as you're moving around. I think that's pretty good for day-to-day stuff. Some people do like to make that more challenging though, and they'll turn that into a little more of what they call like a scale, where they start out with their feet up and their hands up, and then they kind of go through this, and they pretty much, and this is almost more like a gymnast maneuver. That definitely requires even more stability. And so they tend to call that a scale when you have your hands and arms up like that. You can certainly try it if you like it, but I think for general day-to-day stability, doing a simple kind of single leg hip hinge like this is a pretty good place to start. You could stand on, again, maybe your yoga mat, something a little bit less stable. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that where my foot is, okay? Now this adds a little bit more, again, that instability, challenges kind of that inversion and eversion a little bit more, and then I would do the same thing. Okay, so there's a few ideas on how you guys can get back to rehabbing an ankle sprain. Again, it can be a pretty frustrating injury, and this can be a great place to start. For those of you that are athletes, looking for a return to sport, especially more aggressive cutting, pivoting, quick direction changes or changes in speed, certainly soccer players, basketball players, football players, even certainly fighters, for instance, that's going to put a higher demand in your ankle, so you're going to want to do some more sport-specific things for that. At some point, I'll try to upload another video and see if I can maybe speak to some of those things. Agility ladders and stuff like that, that's one way to go. Certainly not the only way though, but I think this is a nice start as far as just kind of breaking ground and getting back to normal day-to-day stuff. This should at least hopefully help you to get back to kind of normal workouts in the gym, and then you can decide how much farther you need to take it. So definitely comment below, let me know what you guys think. Like and subscribe if you like this stuff, and I'll put all the links, not a lot of practice today, but I'll put them at the bottom. And as always, I hope you guys have some fun.